Hi, everyone, and welcome to this panel discussion on practicing presented by a group of state chairs. I would like to congratulate all of the performers and the student ambassadors for their panel discussion earlier. I'm grateful that they were willing to share their experiences on practicing. They shared some obstacles that they came across and discussed their approaches to overcoming these challenges. If you didn't get a chance to check it out, I would recommend that you do that as well as the performances too. Um, so there's a group of us state chairs that have prepared a panel for you all, and we maybe have a different perspective of practicing than what was shared earlier. We maybe have a few years of teaching experience and performing experiences, so we want to share kind of what we've learned along the way. So as we are discussing, we welcome any questions that you might have throughout the discussion. Please place your questions in the chat with your name as well as how many years you've been playing clarinet. That would be really helpful for us. And then we're happy to address those questions as we go. I would love for the state chairs who are participating in this panel discussion to introduce themselves really quickly, and then we can dive in.
Okay, I'll go first. I'm Stephen Klimowski, state chair of Vermont, and just hold it at that.
Perfect.
I'm Julianne Doyle, and I'm the chair of New York.
I'm Josh Gardner, chair of Arizona.
I'm Julia Heinen, chair of Minnesota, and I teach at Cal State Northridge.
I'm Lindblade, and I teach at the University of Central Oklahoma, and I'm the state chair for Oklahoma.
Is Erin here? Maybe not. Okay. So I am Jackie McIlwain. I am the state chair for Mississippi, and I teach at the University of Southern Mississippi. Okay, so as we get started, I'll bring up some questions for us to discuss. If our panel members are particularly interested in something, feel free to raise your hand or unmute or something to let me know that you would love to talk about that. That'd be great. So let's dive in. I know that we all have really busy schedules, and I know our students do as well. So I'm interested to know, how do you schedule your practice time within your busy day? Josh, go for it.
Yeah, we are busy, and our students are very, very busy. And if we want to get something done, then we have to make the time for it. And so I mean, I try to get my practice out of the way. I say out of the way like it's a bad thing. I prioritize it and make sure that I get it done early in the day as much as possible, but I make a point to schedule it. It's part of my schedule, rather than if I have time for it later in the day when I'm tired and mentally and physically exhausted by the day, then it's probably not going to be, for me, optimal. So I try to avoid that, although it's not always possible to avoid it. So I make a point to schedule the bulk of my practice first thing in the morning, every day.
I love to do that too. That is always my go-to. This semester has not been friendly to that. So I make sure that for sure I have that scheduled, that it does need to be a priority for sure to get that scheduled and put that in, whatever chunk of time it can be. I make sure that it gets there. Dawn, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I feel like sometimes now that I've become a professional, I feel like less clarinet is part of my day. So I've been trying to begin and end my day with my clarinet in my hand, because I do a lot of teaching and a lot of meetings and things, but it helps me connect. Thankfully, I have an office that I can go to and practice, because if I had to do that at home, I'm sure, as they said in the chat, my neighbors wouldn't like it too much. But I find that it helps ground me and remember kind of why I'm doing this whole thing. As much as I love teaching, as much as I love faculty meetings, I really need the end and the beginning of my day to have a clarinet in my hands and be doing the work myself. So another thing that I just want to mention is that I don't try to do really difficult practicing in the morning. So my morning practice is kind of my investment in myself, my long tones, my warm-ups, the technique that's going to help me in my evening session actually kind of progress on the more difficult things that I'm working on. And so I find that I have to separate those things. My practice that keeps me in shape as a clarinet player, and then when I really need to make progress on something really difficult, those are usually not in the same practice session. I don't know if that's the same for anyone else on the panel.
I
I
know
love how
I
you
can
talked about.
echo. I can
Go for
echo
it.
what Joshua said. I try to get it done first thing in the morning if I can, and I tell my students to, and likewise schedule it. And I tell my students to schedule it and consider it's a job. If they had a job to go to, they wouldn't be late. They would be there every single time they were scheduled. So I say, in other words, that's my way of saying prioritize it.
Go for it, Julianne.
Oh yeah, so I was gonna kind of jump on what Don was saying. It depends on the day. Sometimes I get in a little bit before my first student, and I'll do some scales, long tones, warm ups, and then sometimes with the student, if it's the first student of the day, and sometimes they're coming straight from class, we warm up together, which is kind of nice. And then yeah, I schedule it. I have to. I have an administrative duty as well. I'm doing admission stuff, so I have to schedule that. Schedule my lessons. It's a very packed day, and then with young kids, there's all of those things around my day that I have to take care of. So it has to be scheduled. And I think that's, as we get older, whether we're young or old, we have to schedule it or it doesn't happen. It's like going to the gym. You have to make it happen. So
Can I add one more thing? Sometimes we don't get everything done in the time that we have scheduled. And, if you have a 20-minute break here or there, if you're efficient and you have realistic goals for those 20 minutes, it could be a very productive 20 minutes that you could allocate to, working on something that you really need to work on, which would be better than not working on it at all. So sometimes practice is not scheduled at all, or sometimes the scheduled practice is it's dispersed throughout the day in small chunks as we have time.
I see
I'll
a
jump.
question in the chat.
Oh, yeah.
I just wanted to point it out. So they said that they're a returning student after a long absence and they're learning a lot of repertoire. So how much time each day should they schedule repertoire versus scales, articulations, and other things? I think that depends on how much time you have. I would suggest kind of ordering the practice session so that each practice session has a little bit of warm-ups and scales and then articulation and jump into the repertoire you're going to be practicing. But I love that you've come back after a long absence and that you've joined those bands. That's very exciting. Congratulations.
Yeah, I'd like to address that question also. I'll give you a little bit more specifics what I do. I try to keep, I always start with a warm up, and my warm up takes 25 to 30% of my total practice time as I'm going through. Right after I do my warm ups, I do what I call my spots. And I have spots that I actually mark with like sticky notes, ones that are like I'm barely able to do them or I'm still learning them stage, and those get red flags. Then I have orange flags, yellow flags, green flags. So I practice the flags, and I practice them in the order of from hottest color to coolest color. And I spend about, depending on the flags, I spend about another 25% of my practice time spots. And then I go into what I call large group practicing. So it might be a section of an etude or an entire etude or a section of a piece or an entire piece, but I'm going from small projects to larger projects as I go through the day. That works best for me. I want to, my idea with doing the really hardcore technical work or hardcore spot work that I need to do, if I cannot learn to do it right after I've warmed up, chances are I'm going to need to try to find another solution for that spot. So it might be another fingering. It might be incorporating more fingerings. It might actually be like, let's say it's something very high and controlled. Well, I find a speed that I can play that at, and then I work the speed down. So I know we always like to think about working things up technically, but for me, there's a lot of things where I have to work it down for control. So that's my 25% of my time. And then the other 45 to 50% of my time is spent with large group learning.
I love that. I tend to assign things in my lessons, similar to like how I structure my practicing. So, I start out in the assignment sheet. I have, long tones warm-ups and things like that, and technique and legato passages, articulation, and then etudes, solo work, and then at the end of that, I assume that my students would want to put in the ensemble work too. So I like how Julia had like the percentages, and I think that's important to balance whatever you're working on and the different ensembles you might be working on, and the investing in yourself. Like someone said, I like that a lot, and it kind of makes me think about balancing long-term versus short-term goals. Does anybody want to kind of talk a little bit about that? Like, how do you handle that long-term versus short-term goals?
I think that when I'm making goals, a lot of times I'm thinking about like my upcoming concerts and what works that I have to perform. So I have a running list of that with the dates. And I work backwards from there to kind of add things in early enough to my life with so that I can get the red flag spots that Julia's talking about of the pieces that are maybe 2 concerts away started sooner. So in a way, that's kind of a long-term goal, but it's a small chunk that I can do right now. So I think my list, it's not fancy. It's in a note in my phone, it just has all the performances. If I get a gig, I add it there. And I just try to every week kind of plan ahead for that. So it's long-term and short-term at the same time.
Yeah, I think it's hard to separate the long term from the short term. In my practice, like Julia mentioned, a large chunk of my practice goes to fundamentals, with the expectation that work will allow me to learn the rep that I need to perform more quickly, because I'll already have the technique to be able to play it. And so I'm not learning technique with the rep. I'm learning them separately and then applying the technique to the rep. And for me, that works really, really well. So when I think of long-term goals, I'm thinking of small refinement. I mean, at the stage that I am right now, small refinements here or there that take a long time to that it takes a long time for you to acclimatize to or absorb into your playing, so that you don't have to think about it all the time. And in the short term, I mean, for me, with depending on the performance schedule, the short term could be learning a new piece to perform, because you might not have more than a couple weeks or a week to learn something before a performance. Depending on what it is and the context. So the short term is learning the piece itself. But I'm always thinking about the long term, the little refinements, or if I want to learn a new technique, or one of my COVID goals after everything got canceled was learning how to slap tongue, and with no expectation that I would be able to do it in a day, a week, a month, or whatever, because we had no idea what was going to happen. And looking at it from not having a deadline and just being able to work on it every day was fairly liberating. So the long-term goals, if you stick with them and you're addressing them in a way that is productive, then you'll achieve those goals if you give yourself enough time. I find that's one of the biggest obstacles to communicate to students, is that a lot of things that we learn are not, one practice session projects or week projects or even month projects. They're very, very long term. And when you accept that and you know that every day that you practice, you're making a step forward toward that goal, it's motivating, and it also takes some stress off, that you don't have to completely own something in one practice session. Okay, I'll shut up now.
Something I do is the activity kind of comes in spurts. So I spend my summer learning repertoire for the fall. I spend my winter break learning repertoire for the spring. I'll spend that little gap of time at the end of the academic year learning things for the summer. And then it's weekly refinement and hitting those little spots. But all along the while, like everyone said, it's the fundamentals, that foundation. We have to always keep that going. And when you're in one of those lulls, as long as you do your foundation every day, you're going to stay in shape too. So.
I was talking to some of my students, and they're big video game players, and my fiance is too. And so he likes to play long games, like they take a quest or whatever, but there's always also side quests. And I feel like some of my goals are kind of like those side quests. Like if I want to learn how to slap tongue, it's something that I'm going to put some effort into, but it's not where I'm driving my car necessarily. It's kind of like the add-on, the side quest thing that I want to do right now. A couple years ago, for me, it was just learning how to speak and teach in a culturally responsive way. And I know that's not necessarily the practice that you're thinking about, but I had to practice it in the terms of I had to kind of slow myself down before I said things to people to rethink how to say things. And so that was kind of like my side quest, like if you're a video game player. Um, and so I think that those things, those goals, they're important to us, but they happen alongside the work that we have to do daily. Yeah.
There's a question in the chat for Julie, I believe. So when you say you work things down for control, do you mean breath control or control over legato intervals?
I mean, both. I'm actually was typing my answer, but I'll say it and then I'll finish typing it. So for breath control, I work it down the metronome. Okay, I have this very odd thing I do for large interval control. I start with, let's say I have to do an octave leap somewhere. So I actually get to the place where I need to do the octave leap, and I start with a minor second. And then I go to a major second, and then I go to a minor third, and then I go to a major third. I find out at what point that interval becomes more difficult, and I do not move on until I have accomplished that. So if I'm working that up and I'm like, gosh, this perfect fifth, this isn't so bad. And then I go to a minor sixth, wow. And I can actually start to feel, oh, this is where in my throat I'm doing something. So I find that spot, and that's where I stay. And actually, once I've solved that spot, to solve the larger intervals to get up to that octave, become much more fluid for me. So I want to know where the spot is that I'm having difficulty, and then I work through it. And it's always with me, I don't know with other people, it's always something physical that I'm doing that I don't realize that I'm doing.
Thank you. So we've talked, about the long-term and short-term goals. What if you are preparing for an audition or a recital? Is there anything that you do differently in the time, like the 2 to 3 months leading up to it, that that you want to add in there?
I
know for me personally. Oh, go ahead.
For me, I took a little break from playing clarinet as well. So right now I'm focusing on endurance. So as a performance gets closer, I increase the amount that I'm running of that performance, so that the weeks leading up to it, I've played through that recital many times, and I know where I'm starting to get tired. And I don't stop when I'm starting to get tired in those practice sessions. I make myself play through it. and deal with it. And I noticed that the more and more I run the entire program by myself, even sometimes making myself count the rests very accurately, even without my pianist, I get more comfortable. And I know how my body is going to react, at least generally. There's always a little bit of excitement that comes from the live performance, but I think working up to a full recital or a large work performance, it's about endurance for me right now. Maybe more so than it was when I was younger and things just came easier.
I'll jump on that a little bit too. In that long-term preparation, I'm always thinking about my intention with each piece on the program, or with audition music, and just really being able to hopefully be in the moment when I do perform that piece. So practicing, some of the students were talking about this earlier, practicing performing, and that's such a big thing. When I was in my doctorate, I think it was, and even in my master's, I would run a program back to back twice to ensure I had the endurance to do it once. And so that then but also staying very mentally present in that. And so, practicing in a way that you can have that mental as well as physical stamina. I think that's important.
I think it cannot be overemphasized how important it is to practice performing if you're learning something to perform it. Um, I have a quick anecdote about that. About 11 years ago, I was learning something to play with the band at ASU, and it was short. It wasn't an endurance thing, but it was fast. It had a lot of notes. And I had done the bulk of my practice sitting in my office. I didn't really give much thought to anything else. I had been doing runs. And then about a week before the performance, maybe two, um, I told myself I should probably stand up. And I stood up, and it felt completely different. Everything felt different. And it was almost like relearning it. And that was the point at which I decided, if I'm going to perform something standing, I'm going to learn it standing from the very beginning. Because it's just one more element that's closer to the performance context. And when we get into the performance, we don't want anything to feel different than our preparation. We want our preparation to prepare us for the performance. So to piggyback on what's already been said, a bulk of my practice these days is running stuff. And if there are problem spots, they get isolated and worked on individually. But if I have an upcoming performance, I am always doing runs because that's the context of the performance. You don't get to stop, right? You have to keep going, and you've got to know what it feels like to get all the way through. And if something does happen, to not let it throw you, and be able to stay on the train. That is definitely going to keep going in a performance.
I love to take a piece of paper whenever I'm getting ready for a recital or audition or something, and I put at the very bottom, I'll put the date of the recital, and then I'll be like, okay, well, maybe 2 weeks before that, I want to do a dress rehearsal with my pianist, and so I'll write the date for that, and then I want to make sure that I start rehearsing with the pianist by this date, give myself 3 weeks or whatever the case might be. And then kind of like work my way up. And then I have like this timeline of goals for myself. And within that, you can break it down to like tempos. And I want to have everything at half tempo. I want to have everything at tempo by this date and things like that. So you're, breaking things down into achievable goals, and that helps me stay calm and as I'm preparing, and not thinking of it as such a huge overwhelming experience. It's like, no, I just have these little things that I need to do right now, and it helps me kind of get going with that. I love, Julianne, you put in the chat, always practice in your performance shoes when standing. Absolutely. And as well as like the pedal when you're turning pages, if you're using an iPad, that's something that I'm kind of new to, using the iPad. And so I make sure that I have a little marking in my music of where I need to hit the pedal, and I practice it so that I don't accidentally forget it or anything like that. So it's just part of that preparation. for sure.
I recently
Um,
just switched to iPad stuff too, and the practice, it really does affect how I practice. I didn't anticipate that as much as I should have, how much it changes how you prepare for rehearsals and things with the half page turns and setting up each single one that you need. So it reminds me of when I used to cut and paste and tape things together when I was younger. But it's definitely changed how I practice my repertoire for sure.
that's great. Changing gears a little bit, I would love to know what strategies you all have for practicing technical passages. Any tricks of the trade that you're willing to share?
Slow.
Sure. I can share a couple.
Great.
One that's, I mean, I do lots of the normal things, work it up, work it backwards. One thing that works for me is I practice, I find where the issue is. Let's say I'm doing, there's a problem of 20 notes, and let's say between notes 11 and 12, it's like where the issue is. So I take that and I practice notes 1 through 11. I put a rest, and then I practice notes 12 through 20. And I do 1 through 11, break, 12 through 20, 1 through 11, break, 12 through 20. Personally, I do it 5 times, and then I can just do it. But there's something about putting that break in there that it resets my brain rather than just. Yeah. So sorry, I didn't mean to talk over somebody. So that's one of many ways, but for me, that's the quickest way that works.
What's interesting when you do that, sometimes you realize that the problem spot is not exactly where you thought it was. It might not be between 11 and 12. It might be between 12 and 13, and then or 10 and 11, and that's causing the problem between 11 and 12.
Right. Or there's more than one spot.
Yeah, exactly. And you don't always know that if you don't break it down and take the time to figure it out. A comment in the chat, break it down in a lot of rhythms and swing. I'm a big fan of using practice rhythms to smooth out really nasty passages that slow to fast practice doesn't really quite it's not enough for. But ultimately what we're trying to do is identify the problem, because the problem might not be exactly what we think it is. And it's always a mechanical problem, right? It's either an air thing, a voicing thing, or a finger thing, and or an articulation thing for that matter. But we're trying to identify what the problem is, and then reduce the cognitive load that the passage is presenting in a way that allows us to actually execute it in a successful way. And that could come from slow practice. It could come from practice rhythms where you have a long note followed by a short note. I like to go even further than swing and double, triple dot things as much as possible. Make the long note as long as possible. Make the fast notes as fast as possible, so that when you put it back into its normal context, it actually feels slow and it feels under control. That's probably the bulk of my my practice is doing practice rhythms, slow to fast practice, and then using practice rhythms to fix things that the slow practice doesn't fix.
Yeah, I also use metric modulation. So if I'm doing a passage, it's let's say in simple time, and I'm going 1 eanda, 2 eanda, 3 eanda, 4 eanda, then I go through it the second time and I start it as if it's starting on the E of the beat. So eanda, 1 eanda, 2 eanda, 3 eanda, 4 eanda, 1. And then I do it as if it's starting on the and of the beat, and then on the of the beat, and then I get back to where it actually started in it. And then if you're doing compound meters and straight 16th notes, you have to do it 7 times. So 5 times for simple and 7 times for compound. But by the time I get through that cycle, it's like, wow, I can play this now because I've heard it 6 different ways or 4 different ways.
I have a way that I work with my students who are having problems pushing air underneath the technique they're working on. And we do a lot of simplification. So if we had lots of groups of 4/16 notes, we would play the first of each four, but supporting air underneath, and then two notes of each four, but supporting air underneath, sustaining the other note, three notes, and then the four notes. And then we would play one, sustain one, four, one, four, one, four, one. So simplification, when you know that the problem is air for me, is something that I spend a lot of time on with my students. I have a lot of undergraduate students, so they're very good at practicing the fingers, but not necessarily putting the air underneath it to make the work actually sing. So I spend a lot of time doing that. So less changing the rhythm, but more changing what notes you're playing within it, but making sure that each note is supported underneath it.
I think it's also important to just be creative in the practice strategies that you use. If you notice a problem, experiment, try different things. Sometimes it can be really beneficial to kind of reverse engineer whatever's happening. Not only from a teaching standpoint, if you happen to be teaching, but also like if it's not a finger thing, say it's a voicing thing, reverse engineering what you're doing with your voicing can help you do some really cool effects like gliss or play in the stratosphere or play some really interesting multiphonics like some of the ones that we heard in the recital earlier. That experimentation can be really, really beneficial both in the immediate and long term.
Something I do too is I set tempo goals within my practice. We were talking about those long-term goals, and if I'm starting to learn something new that's got a lot of technique, I'll start and have, okay, by this date I'm going to be at this tempo, and this date I'm going to be at this tempo, and then all these techniques that are being mentioned with rhythms and such, I will incorporate those.
All right, I have one more thing to add. One more thing. Thank you, Julianne, for bringing that up because I'm a those of you who know me know that I really love spreadsheets. And I built this practice planner thing for both myself and my students to help them plan those tempo goals. And if you break something down, say you have a month to learn something, 30 days, give or take, you can do a lot in those 30 days that doesn't require enormous jumps in tempo day to day. Like you don't have to, I'm going to learn this today and be able to play it up to tempo today. You don't need to do that. You don't need to play it that fast, that soon, because chances are that early on, you're not really ready to do that. And you can learn some really bad habits. You can get really frustrated with yourself, which is, that's not good. So if you kind of owe it to yourself to be patient with things and allow the learning process to happen in the long term rather than the immediate. And I find that pieces that I've learned in that way, when I come back to them, they come back very, very quickly because I put in so much slow practice and gradual incremental increases in that cognitive load that my fingers just kind of know where they're going, even if I haven't played the piece in a few years.
I have a couple I'd like to share. So the first one is if you're working through a passage and let's say you've done all the wood shedding already. So you've done the different rhythms and things like that. What I will do is I will have a movable fermata. So, put the fermata on the first note and play everything else at tempo. And then move the fermata to the second note and everything else at tempo, and then the third, and then the fourth, and so on. And whatever notes you held the fermata and everything around it felt clean and clear, then the note that was under the fermata, that's the note you tend to speed over. You're playing too quickly. So for me, what I do is I'll just circle that note. And then just having it circled, it brings my eyes to it. And that takes care of it right then. So then it's cleaner, and so it's like, I've done the wood shedding. I've done it. Why can't I get it even? And so that little movable fermata has been really helpful for me. I do a lot of the 5-and-1, which is mentioned in the Hadcock Working Clarinetist book. So you play something 5 times, like at 60, and then you move it up. You add 12. So you one time at 72 with the idea of like, I'm just going to slow it down anyway. I'm going to go for it. What's the worst that happens? I mess it up. I'm going to go slower anyway, so it's fine. And then you bring it down to 64, and you play it 5 times at 64, and then you add 12, and then so one time at 76, and so you're kind of building it. It's like stair steps, like 5 1 5 1 5 1, and for me that helps me gain confidence in passages where because I'm knowing that I can play it at different tempos, and it just helps build that confidence. I have students ask a lot if there are any shortcuts to practicing. Not really. Not at all. But there is one thing that I've learned along the way that can be helpful in kind of speeding things up as far as that's concerned. So I'm sure you all know, like, a lot of times, like, the practicing and the learning that we do during the day is reinforced at night when we're sleeping, right? Which is one of the reasons why it's so important for us to sleep. But there's a new study done that says, like, if you repeat something, and then you literally, like, just kind of shut your brain down for 10 seconds. It's like you're resting for 10 seconds. So not scrolling, just like for me, I just close my eyes and I just breathe for about 10 seconds. Then what that does is it basically your mind is going over what you just did. And it's something like 20 times the amount of repetitions that you did. So if you did it 2 times, it's like, and then you rest, it's as if you did it 40. And think about, if you do it 5 times and then you rest, it's just so much more. And that's not something that I rely on, but I use it. And what's the worst that happens? I get a 10-second break. Okay. that's good too. Yeah. Stephen, did you have something?
Oh, that's a great idea. I never thought of that, although I knew about, certainly at night our brains are recouping. I've found that a lot of my students, now I'm at the University of Vermont. It's not a big music department, and certainly a lot of my high school students, but a lot of my students don't know how to practice. They don't know how to break it down into rhythms. And they never thought of being so methodical about it. So I have many of them come to me when I show them. They say, really? Really? I can do that? And then now they've got a goal. Now they know what to do when they sit down and practice. So, I mean, we've all been assuming that, yeah, we know how to do that. Of course we do. We've been doing it all our lives. But the kids oftentimes don't know what to do. So I think for teachers, don't assume anything. Show them how to practice. That's kind of what my book does. It gives them, those basic options is what it does.
So I'm going to address the question in the chat because I actually just did a little experiment with myself about this. I had the same issue. But my fingers tense up issue is my problem because I am incredibly impatient with learning things. So I just have to learn this Teresa Martin piece and if any of you've played hers pieces, they're really not patterns. So I said, okay, I'm going to practice this for 15 days in a row at half tempo, and I'm not going to worry about the tempo. I'm just going to get into the zen of half tempo. And so I did it every day for 15 days, and then I could play it. And I was like, okay, so this actually works. So now I'm excited about trying it on the next thing I have to do, because I'm thinking, was this a fluke or did it actually work? But that Zen quiet finger thing, like when I now can play it up to tempo, it's still there. So I'm thinking, wow, maybe I've been practicing wrong all these years. I should try this 15 days at half tempo and see if I could just learn things like that. But it's pretty zen to do it. I mean, it actually felt really good because I didn't stress myself out that I couldn't get to the next metronome mark. I was just like, okay, I've done my time today. Okay, let me go on to something else. I'll
Another thing
report
is,
back. I'll report back if it works on something else.
please. I heard a famous violinist to give a way of practicing one of those very fierce, fast and long violin concerto runs. And he said he plays at a tempo. But at first he'll just play, I mean, he always practices at a tempo. But first he just plays the first two notes at tempo. Well, that's easy. Then the first three notes, and he adds it. And when the three notes becomes comfortable at tempo, he does four. So that's another way of doing it. Another way I've done it is to do just five notes and do those five notes at tempo. So again, so you get used to conceiving of that tempo, because that can be hard. Lately, I've got an advanced student that's working on the Corigliano concerto, and I have never played it. And I looked at that long run, which seems to have almost no sense to it, and it's supposed to be played as fast as possible, sound like the wind, he says. And I thought, well, what am I going to do? Well, I've written it out, and I've written it out for him in groups of 4, and then in groups of 5, and then in groups of 6, and see how that goes. If you guys have any suggestions how to work that out, let me know. I mean, Julia, you were sort of referring a little bit to that, I think.
So, Steve, my suggestion is have him do that like 2 notes, 3 notes, 4 notes, but backwards. So the last 2 notes, the last 3, the last 4, the last 5.
Yeah, great idea.
So one way that I like to address the tensing up in technical passages is I will play something half tempo and trying to use as little effort as possible. And then I'll kind of have that mentality of like, okay, I'm going to try it a little faster. And I like to do like ranges. So maybe like I'll do it at 60 and then 70 and then 80 and so on. And just be like, okay, I wonder if I can do it at this tempo and keep that same freedom and play it faster. And then if the answer is no, and I'm like kind of gripping again, then I'll just be like, okay, let me chill out with this a little bit more, and I'll play it slowly some more and just really honing in on the concept of like, I'm going to use as little effort as possible. There was one time I was practicing over the summer and I started squeaking and squawking all over the place. And I was like, what is happening right now? And I finally realized that it was because I wasn't like covering the holes all the way. I was like, I'm using so little effort. I was like, yes, I even got there. So then I had to use more effort and it's fine. But allowing yourself that time to kind of just like play it slowly, let yourself play it with as little effort as possible. And then realizing that whenever you're getting faster, you can still keep that, that can still be part of it.
In fact, I would posit that along with all those fundamentals of breathing and posture and whatever fundamentals that we never forget the tension, because the tension is always what's going to slow us down. That's just as important as everything else. So when you practice it past those 3 or 4 notes fast, it's with total relaxation and total naturalness of the motion.
Something else is just always making sure your instrument's in good working condition. The pads are sealing. So sometimes that extra effort is caused because we have a leak or there's something, we don't have our bridge key aligned. I see that so much with students that it's just ever so slightly off. There's a leak. And so they're grabbing, and it turns out it's something with the instrument. So just making sure everything's working efficiently so that you can put forth that minimal effort and nail that technique.
Good point.
What if we go to practicing a lyrical passage? What do you all do when you're learning something lyrical?
I think the first thing you got to do is figure out what you want to do with it. Right? It's, the shape of a phrase, if you break it down into the technique, it's defined by what you do with your air. And when you have a good idea of what you want to do with that phrase, then you can you can work on making sure your air supports that. But you also need to be thinking about intonation, and you need to be thinking about the connection between notes, and all of this has some technical component to it that you have to address in your practice if you want it to be, if you want it to translate into performance. I am a big advocate of practicing with a drone rather than having a tuner in front of me, because I'm not going to have a tuner in front of me in a performance. And if I'm playing with, a non-fixed pitch instrument, like my reed quintet, for example, then, it doesn't matter what the tuner says. If I'm out of tune with the group, I'm out of tune with the group. So, I've got to be thinking about that. That applies whether it's lyrical or technical, but, yeah, I think the number one thing is just figure out what you want to do and have intention, and hear that in your head. Know in your head what you want it to sound like. Because if you don't have a good concept of that, you're not going to know what's going to come out.
I always thinking
Try
of
to have my
singing through it, and being able to vocalize what you want to do with your voice, you can do with your air and shape the sound. And Josh was talking about the drones. I definitely use the drones and think about that. Yeah.
I also, while I'm singing something, I actually try to imagine what other instrument should be playing this. And I get that color in my head. And then when I pick up my clarinet, it's a lot easier for me to get that color. And clarinet can never be the choice of the instrument. You have to pick a different instrument. So sometimes I'll be like, oh gosh, this really sounds like a flute in the lowest register, that hauntingly beautiful hollow sound. So how do you get that? And for some reason that gives me a concept then that I just internalize, and it comes out.
Yeah, I talk to my students about interpreting their phrases. If they're newer at making their own decisions, they've come from a teacher that made the decisions for them. We talk about it like sentences and trying to put different emphasis on different words. And then we talk about how much dynamic range we want to use, and if we use too much or too little compared to the rest of the piece. So when we're starting with younger students, we kind of say if there was just a page full of letters, and you needed to try to read it, what would you do first? And they say, okay, I'd break them down into words. I say, that's great. Then they'd break them down into sentences. That's great. And so we kind of talk about it like that, and then relate it to music. Like, thankfully, we already have words because things are divided into to rhythm within the beats for us. But then we try to make sense of our sentences and then make sense of our paragraphs. And when I was younger, I did this naturally from hearing music before, but I didn't know how to explain the decision that I made. So if you have a teacher and they say, play it like that, maybe just prompt them and say, why'd you do it like that? And then they'll kind of guide you into their reasoning. Maybe the highest note of the phrase was the note, maybe it was on an important beat. So learning to have confidence in your musical decisions comes after trying lots and lots of times and asking lots and lots of questions. So if you're in that process, I'm excited for you because it's great. And once you have formed your opinions, the music will truly be yours, and it's very exciting. But if you're unsure and you're kind of like, yeah, these people are talking about practicing phrases, but I don't know how to make my decisions, then just start trying them on for size. Trying each beat as the most important one, and until you find the one that feels right. And if it feels right to you, then go with it. But I think that there's a confidence that we have to build within ourselves that we're making the right musical decisions. And then once we've done that, then we can practice it and never miss it again because we've practiced it exactly the way that we want it to be in performance. And that's something that happens throughout your life. But if you're at the beginning of it, it's trial and error a lot of the time.
Also practice things at different tempos. Sometimes with lyrical things, we get locked into, oh gosh, it's got to be quarter note at 66. We'll try it 3 times as fast. And I'm going to encourage you, if you're working on the Copland concerto, try the opening up until the cadenza in 1. Try it as if it's a waltz in one, and you will actually hear what the melody is supposed to do there.
Um, at uh, at the basic level, so if I'm working with a younger student, I like to kind of work with them as far as identifying each phrase. Like, okay, this is the beginning of the phrase. Where does the phrase end? And then, okay, where's the apex of the phrase? Like, where do you want to aim for? And like that can be my starting point with someone. And then as they develop and things I like to ask them, what's the mood that you're trying to portray, or what image do you see in your head? And sometimes just that, or thinking of an adjective, or trying different adjectives. Think about, presenting this as royal or whatever. So anything like that can really change the way someone interprets the music, and so it's really fun to kind of experiment with that a lot. Um, oh, Dawn puts a chart in the chat.
Yeah, I
What is
have an
that chart?
adjective wheel, and generally my
Mm.
students start with the adjectives that are in the center of the wheel when I ask them, what does the music sound like? And then we kind of expand out to try to make it sound like the outer ring, which is a little bit more challenging. We've also used this adjective wheel in studio class and kind of said, okay, write down for this A section what adjective you think your colleague was going for. And it's been really fun. But I like to use it myself when I just come to the generic, this sounds sad, this sounds happy, to kind of push myself to figure out what kind of happy, what kind of sad. So I found it helpful. I just dropped it in the chat.
Thank you. Thank
Yeah,
you.
thanks, Don.
Uh,
That's very helpful. I find it helpful also for students to to pick words, but that's of course just the beginning. They really have to feel it, and it really has to come from inside. I encourage them to listen. Like for instance, if they're learning a Weber concerto, listen to his operas. He was an opera composer. He wrote theatrically, and imagine that you're on stage and in an opera. I imagine a heroine at the beginning of that first concerto. That has a nervous breakdown by the halfway down the page there, you guys know it, or whatever, but it's something that's human, and it's something that's real. When it comes to Weber, we can be schmaltzy because he was an early romantic and those guys were schmaltzy. So anyways, I have fun with it like that.
so we have just a couple minutes left. So I kind of want to throw out the question of how do you maintain motivation in your practice, and or how do you keep joy in your practice? What are some things that help you maintain motivation or keep the spark?
I-
I think for me, I've went through something different. I battled cancer, and so I had to stop playing for a while. And when I wasn't playing, I really missed it. So right now, I'm motivated just because um, I know how much it takes to come back, and so it motivates me to make sure my articulation doesn't fall below this number and things like that. The speed of my 16th notes. I kind of know how in shape I am by certain things that I practice on the regular. And I just know how hard it is to come back from if I fall below that. So my motivation is partially for my sanity, just so that I can keep it manageable. So I know that if I do something more often, I won't fall behind, and that's important to me. Uh, as a teacher, I want to make sure that I can play what my students are playing. I don't want to be out of shape enough that I can't perform the repertoire they're performing. And so having students actually motivates me to keep improving. And I know that's probably the same for a lot of people in the panel today. But when I was younger, I had more issues with kind of getting into regular practicing because I was very social. So now I try to make sure that I schedule into my life the social things that are important to me first. And I work my practice around those things. So I don't feel like if I'm practicing, I'm not getting to do this. I am definitely going to get to spend the time with my fiance and take my dog for a walk because I've scheduled those things. So that helps me now to overcome the social problem that I had when I was younger.
Routine is really great for me. Like I have a routine in my practice. and I've done it long enough that I don't feel like I need motivation to do it. I just know that it's something that I have to do and that it's scheduled into my day. With that said, though, I think it's also important to have like something that you're always trying to learn. Like you're always learning something new. There's always something that you're striving for. You have these short-term and long-term goals, and reminding yourself that when you address those on a daily basis, you are taking a step toward achieving those goals. And you've got to tell yourself, and you have to convince yourself that you are taking those steps. If you're obviously, if you're doing the work, if you're not doing the work, you're not taking those steps. But that is motivation, especially when you achieve those goals. You learn a new technique, or you learn a new piece and you perform it. Like it's a very nurturing cycle that I think is really important for my own motivation. I also try to avoid the word should toward myself. I should be able to do this, or I should be able to play this up to this tempo, or I should be able to do this technique. If I can't, I can't. There's no point in getting like worked up about the should, because that's frustrating, and then that usually causes other issues. So by having those goals, I don't need to worry about should. I will be able to. I might not be able to do it right this second, but I will be able to do it later if I'm working at it.
The other thing to remember is like you're not going to be motivated every day. It's like life. So I have projects that on days where I do not feel motivated, okay, because I'm a list person and it makes me feel better to cross things off a list. So I actually have projects in my practicing that are short enough that I feel good about having crossed it off. So and then there are days where it's like, okay, I feel really motivated to spend a lot of time working on something that's a much longer term goal. So my advice would be kind to yourself and recognize what you can and want to do. But the answer is, well, I don't want to practice. Well, honestly, that I don't even think about that statement anymore. It's just like I have to practice and let me just do it. I don't want to wash, I don't want to do laundry. Well, I have to do laundry or I can't leave the house. So be kind to yourself and just have things you can pivot to be on the right, be accomplishing something rather than destroying what you've worked on.
Right. In the panel earlier with our ambassadors, they were talking a lot about how they just have to not scroll on their phones. That part of why they can't practice is that they just get on their phone and they scroll, and then it's been a half an hour and they've lost track of time. Um, and I understand the losing track of time thing, and the distraction that they have. But sometimes there are days when I sit down to practice and I lose track of time and oh my gosh, it's dinner and I haven't even made anything. And I like to, maybe the joy is just those days when the practicing just feels good and you're not tired and you get to go on and you get a lot done. Those days are fewer than they maybe used to be when I was younger, for sure. So I loved the advice they gave though to other people. So I'm going to restate it here for anybody who's an iPad practicer. If you have an iPad that you're going to put music on and that's going to be the thing that you use to read music, don't install anything else. Put it in airplane mode and just focus on your task. So I think that was really great advice, and I just wanted to bring it up. I do think that there are challenges now that weren't there when this panel was in school, for sure. And so, overcoming that just a waste of time, the social media, and being disciplined to take a break from it can be difficult.
So we're running out of time, but Stephen, you mentioned, or you unmuted for a moment. Do you want to share something and then we'll move on?
I was just going to let me see. It was something Joshua said about should, and Leon Rushinoff. If a student ever mentioned should, he said it doesn't exist. Get rid of the word should.
Nice. Nice. I like to think of I'm going to go play instead of practice because practice feels like a chore. So I like to think I'm going to go play. I'm going to go play and have fun. All right. Well, this concludes our panel discussion on practicing. Thank you all for your attention. I'm going to turn it over so that we can go on to the awards ceremony.